Welcome to The Takeaway. I'm Melissa Harris Perry. In June, Freya the Walrus showed up on the shores of Norway and became an unexpected tourist attraction. In spite of her appeal, or maybe because of it, Norwegian officials considered her a threat to people who ignored the warnings about getting too close to the friendly sea mammal. After all, Freya was a wild animal. And was is the operative word, because the Norwegian Directorate of Fisheries chose to euthanize Freya. Jason Horowitz is the Rome bureau chief at the New York Times. He's been covering Freya's story for the paper.
Freya was a 1,300-pound walrus, and she basically spent the last weeks of the summer around Oslo and entertaining Norwegians who sort of loved watching her and getting close to her and taking selfies with her in certain circumstances. And she became sort of the mascot of the Norwegian summer.
And what was she doing there? I mean, was she brought to Norway or did she find her way there?
I think she got lost for a long time. I mean, for years, she'd been sort of appearing in northern countries, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, in Norway, even in Great Britain. And so she had just been sort of on her own for a while. And there's a theory that by the Norwegian government that she was perhaps following an invasive species of oysters, Pacific oysters, to the Oslo coast, and had found essentially a plethora of food to eat and saw no reason to leave. So it's definitely unusual because you don't hear often about, a lone walrus showing up on the beach or in a harbor. But that's what happened this summer, and it was delightful for lots of people in Oslo.
Why is it that she came to the end that she did?
So what happened was that because people kept getting close to her, the government in Norway, which at first seemed to welcome her, their messages sort of took on a greater urgency as people in Oslo kept getting closer to her. And also as she kept getting closer to people in kayaks or people swimming out in the fjords. And so what the government officials started saying was, listen, if you don't stay away from this walrus, something bad is going to happen to this walrus. I mean, they didn't put it quite like that, but I think that the words they used was something like, we're going to have to green light an operation. This ominous language about some sort of hit was apparently going to be put on this walrus. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened.
Freya was shot to death by officials?
According to the people I spoke with, she showed up at this marina, which she had been to before, this rather fancy marina where even the King of Norway keeps his boat. And the folks out there had gotten used to her and they took it almost as no big deal, right? They set up some workers from the marina to keep an eye on her. It was actually just two teenage kids with walkie-talkies. And so that when she was on the boat, everyone could swim. They could jump off their floating saunas and into the water. And then when she would dive off, everyone would have to get out of the water. So she went up and down about 10 times that day. And during that time, some of the managers of the marina called the Directorate of Fisheries, which is responsible for wildlife, and asked for some help. And about 4 guys came, and the manager of the marina described them as 4 nice guys, and they sort of helped keep an eye on Freya, and they made sure that people stayed away from her. They even took videos of her. And then at around, I guess after midnight, everyone left. The marina manager was one of the last people to leave. He said he left about 1 o'clock. And he came back the next day and he found that the boat that Freya was on was gone and the ropes had been cut. And essentially what he thinks, and what seems to be true, is that the 4 nice guys from the fishery directorate waited for everyone to leave and then took care of Freya.
I'm trying to understand why Norwegian officials chose to euthanize Freya instead of finding other options to keep her human fans safe.
So you would think, you just shoot it with a tranquilizing dart, right? Like in a movie, and then you can move her. But because she's so big, any tranquilizer, any sort of sedation would not occur immediately. And there's a high chance that she would slip off the boat and into the water, and the sedative would take effect when she was in the water and she would drown. Other ideas were floated about putting her in a large cage, but inevitably they came down to the conclusion that it was too dangerous, that she would probably die a worse death. rather than a death that they considered at least more humane.
If someone was hurt or maybe even killed, and of course, someone or at least something was hurt and killed, right? Freya was. It's not to make an equivalency between human life and walrus life, but it does seem in this case like, even if it wouldn't be a simple endeavor, that maybe there is something to be said in a broader sense, like not just this individual walrus, but in a broader sense about the presumption that when human life and animal life come in contact, that it is always exclusively human life that should be prioritized.
I think that almost always people are going to end up siding with people. And I think that's clearly what happened here. And, people are angry about it, though. I mean, there's sort of this broad consensus that this is a sad thing that happened, right? Nobody's happy about it. There are people who think that it's understandable, people who are outraged, but everyone is sad about this. And one of the people who was especially sad is this guy I talked to who was so outraged and sad that he's raised money to build a sculpture of Freya. But one thing, I bring him up because one thing that he said to me, which stuck out, was why was the walrus punished and not the people? There's a valid point there that if people had been warned to stay away from her and they were endangering her to a certain extent, then maybe, we're talking fines. I don't know. Maybe we're talking, I don't know what the correct punishment for this is, if they're even doing anything illegal. But there's a clear sense in Oslo and in Norway, to the extent that this is a sort of murder mystery, that the true sort of culprit might have been the people who got close to her. The people who are closest to her often, are closest to the victim are often the prime suspect. And I think that in this case, that might be true also, that this sort of disregard for what would happen to her in order to get a good sort of social media shot of her might have proved fatal.
So the last question is, so what has happened to her? We know that she was shot and killed, but what has happened to her remains.
So once she is shot, she arrives at essentially the official veterinarian headquarters for the government, about 40 kilometers outside of Oslo. And she arrives half frozen, I think under a tarp. And the veterinarians sort of get to work on taking samples, blood samples, organ samples. And that means that she, as one of these veterinarians put it to me, she no longer looks like a walrus. I think the exact thing he said was, so you will not recognize that this is a walrus anymore. That's sad, right? I mean, this is this thing that was, this animal that was beloved. And now she's samples in a lab. Now, here's the very, very, very thin silver lining. Because of the outrage in Norway, they managed to salvage the skeleton of Freya, and they have given it apparently to the Museum of Natural History there for research. So Freya has given her body to science.
Jason Horowitz from Rome, the bureau chief at the New York Times. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
What do you think about a lot and need to talk about more?
I just have this big secret that I can't tell anybody.
Death, Sex, and Money is an interview podcast featuring unusually personal conversations.
For the first time in my life, I do not need a man to be whole. And that's what our life is supposed to be about. And man, it takes work. It doesn't just happen.
I'm Anna Sale. Find Death, Sex, and Money wherever you get your podcasts.